Good evening. Welcome to our fourth Unpacked webinar on reducing food waste at home. My name is Jane Simpson and I am the Training and Events Coordinator for Zero Carbon Cumbria, part of Future Proof Cumbria. I'll be starting and finishing the webinar this evening. Next slide, please. So this webinar is for householders and those buying their own food. And our focus this evening is to provide practical information on how to avoid food waste and wasted food with an opportunity to ask questions. And so I'd like to introduce our speakers to you this evening. We have Chris Dove. He's the Waste Reduction Officer at Cumberland Council. Thank you to Chris this evening for giving up his time and time previously in terms of pulling the presentation together. And also Barbara Herridge. She's the Waste Services Manager at Cumberland Council. Again, thanks to Barbara for giving up your time this evening and for preparing so solidly for the presentation. And we've also got supporting us this evening, Robin Johnson from Zero Carbon Cumbria, and she's doing the IT. And so, next slide, please. I'm going to hand straight over to Chris now, and he's going to kick us off for the first half of the webinar, and then we'll move on to Barbara secondly, and then I'll finish off later on this evening. Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. So I'll just go through a quick outline of what we'll be covering. So we'll start off with a little bit of context to explain why wasting food is such a big issue. Then the bulk of it will be focusing on some practical steps to help us reduce the amount of food that gets wasted. And then we'll wrap up and we'll have a final Q&A at the end, but we'll have opportunities for questions at various points during the agenda. I'll just acknowledge at this point that we've drawn quite a bit from Waste Resources Action Programme, that's known as WRAP, and from their brand, Love Food, Hate Waste. Also from the Food Standards Agency, where we've referred to sort of food safety information. And just to reiterate, this is really pitched at householders rather than, say, at businesses, mainly because that's really what we can influence right now. So assuming that on the whole that people are buying their food mainly rather than growing food, which would be a whole different topic, that we're not expert chefs and don't have special equipment that commercial organizations might have, but probably doing at least some of our meal preparation from scratch. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide and just start diving into the issue itself a bit and why it's an issue. Well, first of all, it's a big cost to a typical household at a time of substantial cost of living pressures. WRAP estimate that a typical UK family, so that's a family with children, is spending about £1,000 a year on food that ends up going uneaten. So just to put that into context, that's pushing on for half of a typical council tax in the area. Or another way of looking at it, when I looked at median incomes, it's pushing around 2 weeks take-home pay. So that's 2 weeks graft just to pay for stuff that goes in the bin. So that's quite an incentive to reduce the amount that gets wasted. And then next slide. It's got a substantial environmental impact as well, particularly when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions that drive climate change. So it's estimated that about 6 to 8% of greenhouse gas emissions globally are from the production of food that doesn't get eaten. And I think it's worth saying in this context that it's mainly the big impact of wasting food, whilst food to landfill, if it does end up in landfill, is a big impact. That's not the biggest. That's not the biggest impact. It's the production of food in the first place, and all the wasted resources that go into it, and that includes not just carbon emissions, but about 70% of land in the UK is given over to agriculture and food production. About 70% of fresh water use is food production. So if the food gets wasted, all those resources get wasted. Now, food here in Cumbria generally doesn't end up in landfill, but even so, it's what happens beforehand that's the big impact. And I think the next slide is just another way of saying that. So this is from the Cumbria carbon footprint and the Cumbria carbon baseline. That's the report, and that shows bottom left sector of that circle, the green bit. A quarter of emissions are from the food and drink that householders buy. So in the UK, if typically 20 to 25% of that doesn't get eaten, then that is a big amount of avoidable climate impact, as well as a big dent in people's pockets. So there are plenty of reasons why we might want to reduce the amount of food that's wasted. But if we go on to the next slide, we can start diving a little bit into where and why is food being wasted. So this is data from RAP, and it might maybe come as a surprise. Nearly 70% of it is from households, which certainly isn't to say that it's households who are to blame. It's not. This isn't a finger wagging exercise. The issues around why food gets wasted are pretty complex when you dive into it. But it's just to say that as householders, there is at least something we can all do to make a bit of a difference. And if we go on to the next slide, we can start looking a little bit more at why within households food gets wasted. And just if anyone's wondering why the 5 million tonnes is a bit less than on the last slide, this is just because we're now looking at the bits of food that are judged to be edible. The previous slide included the sort of the inedible bits, the bones, the onion peelings, and so on. So out of edible food, about 40% of it that's wasted is because it doesn't get used in time. Either people buy too much or they don't manage to store it. So it's gone off, or people think it's gone off but before it gets eaten. Then about a quarter of it is because of what's called personal preference. So that might be, for example, maybe not eating crusts on bread, or perhaps only liking bananas when they're at a certain stage of ripeness, or peeling potatoes when potato peel's edible. So that's another significant chunk. And then another quarter is because people are either preparing too much or putting more than people are going to eat on the plate, and there's stuff left over at the end of a meal. If there are no questions just now, we can move onto the practical chunk and look at the steps to reducing waste. So in this, we've structured this as a little bit of a journey. So starting with thinking about what we might be eating, what we might be having for meals, and then that informing the shopping, then thinking about what we might do in the kitchen. So that's with food storage and with food preparation. And then at the end, what to do with anything that's left over, whether that's ingredients we've not used up, or perhaps it might be prepared meals that are left over. So in reality, not everything's quite so linear and straightforward. A lot of what the information and techniques we might talk about could apply at various stages, but hopefully that makes it a little bit of a narrative. And I think at this stage it's really important to acknowledge that every household and every individual is different, and we're all up against different things in our lives, and what the big issues are and what solutions are going to work for us are going to be different. But hopefully, what we're about to look at will give perhaps a little bit of a toolkit that people can apply as it relates to their own lives and circumstances. So if we can start on that journey on the next slide and have a look really before going shopping and thinking about, well, what we're getting and meal planning. And meal planning probably, to be fair, isn't for everyone. It's probably this is probably the most involved and perhaps demanding bit of everything that we're going to discuss. But I think bear with it, because apart from other than reducing waste, there's also evidence, or at least some evidence, that meal planning can help with maintaining better diets. It can help on a practical level as well. And we've had people come up to us when we've given them these little meal planners and say, oh, it's so handy having this on the fridge. I know what I'm going to prepare for dinner on Tuesday night, and I don't have to think about it anymore. So see what you make. See if you're not a meal planner, see what you make of it. So here goes with some ideas about how to approach it. I think a key to it is trying to make it reasonably realistic and flexible, to reflect the realities of our own lives, and start with having a look at what people are doing during the week and who's going to be in when, and which are the busy days when you're going to need something quick. And those might be the days when you do something that's straight from the store cupboard, or something out of the freezer. And then if you're doing something a little bit more ambitious, cooking from scratch, plan to do that when you've got the bit more time to do it, or perhaps do batch cooking in advance, say at the start of the week. And then it's all done ready, and you don't have to think about it. And it's well worth as well having a little bit of a look round the either the fridge or the store cupboard, and see whether there's anything that needs using up, and then plan meals around using up what you've already got and what most needs using. Now, if that's a little bit abstract, I hope the next slide might make it a little bit more alive. So these are based on BBC Food, and they've got some budget meal plans. They've done them for a week. Doesn't have to be a week. Can plan over whatever time frame makes sense to you. But I think it's worth having a little look at these to exemplify. So if Robin, you can jump to the web page and we can just show what the meal plans look like. And if we scroll through that, it gives lots of different recipes, and they're sort of designed to complement each other and to make good use of food over the course of the week. Now, in reality, you're probably not everyone's going to cook from scratch every day, and if you're likely to be eating out, then allow for that as well, rather than buying stuff that's not going to get eaten. But these are quite useful because they consolidate it into a shopping list, or the base, or an ingredients list, which can be basis for the shopping. And I did a bit of a run through of some of these and just check, well, does this use up or everything that's on the list in the course of a week? And it pretty much it did. So I think it's helpful to illustrate that point. And if we dip into an example of one of the recipes, which I think was the quesadillas, and just scroll down that, because something like this, it's got things like recipe tips, which help with avoiding wasting food. So, for example, this has a fried bean mix, which you don't need all of it for this recipe, but it's then part of something else later in the week. And then there's some tips about how to store stuff, or whether stuff can be kept in the freezer if it's not going to get used up quickly. So with a lot of these, they include little tips like that to make using up ingredients from one recipe to make something else later on, so everything gets used up, and tips on storage. So I think that maybe makes it come a little bit more alive. And I think with that particular one, it's a meal plan for one as well. And I think quite a lot of people comment that it can be harder to get the right amount if you're in a single person household, for example. So that just gives a little bit of an illustration or some ideas of perhaps how to overcome that. I mean, this page does have all sorts of family and other budget examples. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a feel for the idea. So I think if we go back to the slides now. That's great. I think one thing just to comment on as well, it's sort of having that quick, easy, familiar option, or something out of the store cupboard for those busy days. And I think the advantage of something like that is, if plans don't work out, then something from the store cupboard, if you don't get around to making it, it's fine. Those will all keep till next week anyway, and it doesn't go to waste. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an overview on that before we come on to the next stage, which is doing a shopping list. So I think that example illustrates how a meal plan can be basis for a shopping list, and it depends to the extent to which people want to plan things, and what different lifestyles are. Generally, probably we're less planned around meals like breakfast, and it's just making a reasonable allowance for how many people are in and what sort of thing are they going to what sort of thing are they going to eat, and which days might you need a packed lunch, and which days might you be working from home, say, or which days are you going to be out, and then allowing for some of those staples on that sort of basis. But you can have some flexibility on it as well. It doesn't have to be absolutely prescriptive. It might be fruit for lunchtime, or enough bread for breakfast, just to give a bit of an idea of how much you might need. But it then allows you to take advantage of, say, any seasonal offers, or any reduced items without it going to waste. And then notes on the phone are handy too. I think one comment generally looking at templates for shopping lists, and this will get picked up later implicitly, tend to be lists, but it's worth adding on quantities as well, so that you're not only buying the right stuff, but the right quantities. And if all this sounds a little bit much, have a quick look before you go and do the shopping. See what you've already got, and if nothing else, that reduces the risk of buying loads more stuff that you've already got anyway, and that should reduce the risk of reduce of waste. So as the saying goes, take a selfie, little photo on the phone, just so when you go shopping, you know what you already have. And then on this section, finally, if we actually go to the shops, on the next slide, the shopping list then is your guide, and try to stick to the shopping list, and then you're buying the food that you're likely to eat, and then having got that, you can then eat with what follows. You can eat what you buy, and that's essentially the approach to reducing waste. If available, buying produce loose and unpackaged can certainly reduce waste. There'd been a report a couple of years ago from WRAP which found that unpacked fruit and vegetables meant that people can just buy things in the amount that they're likely to use up, which again can reduce waste quite considerably. And then things like canned and frozen produce can also be really good options. If it's frozen, you can take out basically what you need, put the rest back in the freezer, and it will keep. It's almost waste free. Canned produce, again, it will keep a really long time, and of course it doesn't take up freezer space. The only thing is, once opened, then it does need to be consumed quite quickly. But they're well worth considering. And remember, a bargain is only a bargain if you know that you can use it before it goes off. So yellow label, if you can get it in the freezer or cook with it, brilliant, absolutely fine. But just be aware of some of the 3 for 2 deals, because they can be made to look tempting. I mean, I very much assume that people are going physically shopping with this one, and a lot of people, of course, will buy online. So if anyone's got any comments about online shopping and the pitfalls around that, then yeah, do pop those in do pop those in the chat or ask questions. But hopefully that's given a bit of a walk through that stage of things. And we're now back from the shops, breathe a bit of a sigh of relief and an opportunity for any questions.
Yeah, shall we move on to you, Barbara? I think you were picking up next, were you?
Thank you, yes. So I'm carrying on with in the kitchen now. So can I have the next slide? Thank you, Robin. So we've got a question for you. What would you do if you had something that was in your fridge with a use by date of today, i.e. the 28th of April? Can you put any answers in the chat, please? This isn't a test, it's just to give you some ideas. Great one, freeze it, yeah. Use it or pop it in the freezer. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Use it today. Yeah, that's brilliant. Eat it, says Emma. Thank you. These are all great suggestions. And right, the use by date is a health and safety date. You have to use it by that date or freeze it by that date up until midnight on that day. So it's a date that we always say to people, that's the real one to worry about. The best before date is a quality date, which is a guide for the food will be freshest before that date, will taste as the manufacturer or the supplier wanted it to by that date, but you're not going to get ill usually if you eat it after that date. So it's a guide to quality, but you must use by that date. So thank you for your comments on that. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is just a little graphic that shows the difference between best before and use by dates. It's probably worth us saying that actually quite a few products are now taking some of the dates off, but use by will stay on because of its importance from food standards perspective. So use by food can be eaten or frozen up to that date. The best before, you can still eat food for a while after the best before date, but if you eat it after that date, it may have lost some of the quality that the manufacturer supplier intended. Generally, the sort of things that have use by dates on them are things like milks, dairy products, cream-based products, meat-based products like sausages on that picture. But I say you will find now that some products don't have any dates on them at all. And that's just so that you can use your senses and assess whether you think that product is suitable for you to buy and eat. Can I have the next slide, please? Chris has just put in the chat as well that a lot of dairy products are now moving to best before. And I'd agree. I think there's been quite a lot of changes in the last few months, last 12 months, 18 months, so that manufacturers are increasingly conscious of food waste and worried that people are throwing away things before they really need to. They're changing and moving towards just either not having a date on at all. So let's move on to storing in the kitchen, which is the next thing. Most produce lasts longer in the fridge. We all know that. The exceptions are really things like bread, bananas, pineapple, onions, garlic, those sort of things. Certainly onions and garlic best stored out at room temperature and a cool, dry place if that's possible. I have lived in flats where it's not been very easy to put things like that in a cool, dry place because there hasn't been a cool, dry place. So it is a case of using a judgment a bit about what's the best place, but generally would say keep things like potatoes, carrots, onions out of the fridge, which suggests that tomatoes and cucumbers are also better at room temperature. Personally, I put them in the salad drawer of my fridge, but there's some things where it's not cut and dry, the guidance. And as I've said just now, there are some exceptions to what should go in the fridge, and bread, bananas, pineapples are 3 of those things. As a general rule, though, vegetables should go in the crisper unit at the bottom, so it's good to put them in that unit, and that's what it's designed for. Fruit either should go in a separate drawer in the fridge. It's good to put fruit in the fridge. It stops it ripening so quickly. The exception is bananas and pineapple, as I've just mentioned. And the other thing is that some fruits release a gas. Bananas, good example, called ethylene, which means that anything placed near them will also ripen quickly if they're placed next to bananas. So that's another reason to either keep them out of the fridge in a place on their own, or for produce, the fruit that goes in the fridge, in a separate drawer if you can. Uncooked meat, you probably all know this, fish, poultry, anything uncooked should go to the bottom of your fridge, on the bottom shelf, to stop it dripping, contamination. That's a health and hygiene advice. That's the coldest part of the fridge as well, the bottom of the fridge. So always put those kind of products at the bottom. Eggs, dairy go in the middle temperature. Leftover items, things that are already cooked, can go at the top where it's least cold. The other thing is the door. The shelving in the door tends to vary quite a lot in temperature as you open and close the door. So the best thing is to put things in there like condiments, not milk, because that temperature variation can cause the milk to go off too quickly. If you can label things with dates of when you put them in the fridge, I must say I'm notoriously bad at this, and although I've got a small fridge, I have things lurking at the back of the fridge in an old ice cream container that I haven't a clue when I put them in there, or even what they are. So I must follow my own advice a bit better on this. And the other advice is keep your fridge between 0 and 5 degrees. The advice is always to keep it at 5 degrees or below. A lot of people have their fridge too warm, which means the food goes off too quickly. I was speaking to a lady on Saturday who said to me, "Oh, I have a feeling my fridge is way too warm." So I was able to give her a fridge thermometer to check the temperature of her fridge. You can buy these to just double check. She said there was a lot of water in the bottom of her fridge, and her food was going off quite quickly. So I suspect her fridge was too warm, but it is best to check it if you can. Can I have the next slide, please? So the freezer is your best friend, as we probably know. It acts like a pause button, and you can freeze most things. There's some exceptions. I did an experiment once with cream and non-dairy cream, and although they all froze okay, they actually came out looking very sort of yellow and lumpy when they were defrosted. So we wouldn't recommend freezing oily things or things with very high water content unless you don't mind them coming out as sort of mushy when they're defrosted. It's better if you can freeze things that you want in the state that they are, that are relatively dry or not oily. The other thing I'd say is, again, put them in an airtight container, label them, and freeze them in portions that are useful to you. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is an example that Chris and I have done of us freezing things in containers and or ways in which we can both use them. So on the right is flat packed herbs that Chris has just chopped up and frozen flat, which is a great way of freezing stuff and using it. And on the left is some frozen parsley that I chopped up, mixed with a bit of water, and put it in a freezer ice cube tray, so that I just pop in when I'm cooking something. I just pop one of those parsley ice cubes in my cooking. So think about when you're freezing how you're going to use stuff. A great example that I can think that I've done really badly this week is my partner cooked massive like tomato sauce in a great big pan. I came home and he said, I've used all the vegetables and I've cooked a great big bolognese sauce. I said, great, that's good you've used all the vegetables up, but I've frozen it in 2 great big ice cream tubs. And I know there's only 2 of us. We won't, when I defrost it, we won't use a full ice cream tub's worth of sauce. So it's just worth thinking about before you do freeze things. And your freezer should be at minus 18. That's the temperature of a typical freezer. I can see somebody's put in the chat, I've never understood what blanching is and how to do it properly. How I do it, and I don't know whether that's properly, is just, so if I've got, say, board beans that I've picked last year in the garden, I had a glut of board beans, and I literally just put them in a boiling pan of water really quickly for a minute or 2 to blanch them, and then I've put them in the freezer in a freezer bag in packs of relatively small packs. And my understanding is that blanching is quickly putting something into boiling water, and then you have it ready to freeze. Others have got other comments on that, please say and stick them in the chat. Be really, really helpful. But that's what I usually do when I do something like that. The other thing to say on freezing is something like ginger, a ginger root, which I never used to freeze and quite often would go off in the door of my fridge, go moldy. I now freeze it all the time, and it's actually much easier to grate when you take it out. I take it out frozen, grate it frozen quickly and stick it back in the freezer, and I find that loads easier than grating raw ginger, and I'm not wasting it as much as I would have done in the past. Somebody else has said we've got lots of stackable same size Tupperware containers that hold a single or double portion depending on the dish, and that really found that really helpful. Going quickly on to what happens if you've got something that doesn't look quite perfect. What can you do with them? Very rare I'd probably mash that up and stick it in a smoothie or a cake. It's perfectly fine to eat. It just doesn't look very appetizing. The tomato with mold, the recommendation is not to eat that. The Food Standards Agency advises that toxins can be beneath the skin. So it might look like the mold is just on the skin, but if you just cut the skin off where it's moldy, there might actually be toxins in the tomato or other fruit beneath that. So their advice, the Food Standards Agency, is not to use that. Sprouting potatoes, you can just brush off those sprouts and they're perfectly fine to cook. Rice, which is one we get loads of questions about, if it's been in the fridge for 2 days, we would recommend do not eat it. It has to be properly cooled once you've cooked it, and it can be only used then once it's been cooled and put in the fridge within 24 hours. So 2 days old, potentially unsafe. So we would recommend not using that. A limp carrot, perfectly fine. Stick it in some water, chop it up, and okay for soups and things. So there's good advice available on, in terms, actually, I forgot, on freezing on the wrap, Love Food Hate Waste website. If you search for recipes and you search for product rather than a recipe, so if you put in cabbage, for example, I've got leftover cabbage, what can I do with it? It will tell you how to freeze it. It will both give you a recipe for using it and it will tell you how to freeze it. So apologies, I forgot. That's another source of information on freezing. Can I have the next slide, please? And then the next thing on cooking is cooking the right amount in the kitchen. One of the reasons we waste so much food, as Chris's little graph showed earlier, pie chart showed earlier, 24% of nearly all waste food waste comes from preparing too much. There's a really great portion calculator on the Love Food Hate Waste website, which gives you advice on how much to cook. So if you've got people visiting, for example, I don't know, say you're not used to cooking for 6 adults and 4 children, you're used to cooking for 3 adults and 2 children, you can scale it up using that portion calculator and it will tell you how much to cook. Can I have the next slide, please? And then there are some just rules of thumb that are quite useful to remember, or to, if you've got a measuring cup, that's great. But other measures that you can use are just a small teacup. A teacup is very good for cereal. I don't know if you can see these things. If you can't, I'll read them out. A mug is really good for pasta, for a portion of pasta. A portion of pasta is about 100 grams, 75, 100 grams. That usually fits in a mug, sorry. Mashed potato, use your fist. That's a good portion size for mashed potato. Uncooked meat, hold out your hand and put the meat in the palm of your hand. That's a good measure for that. A small tin, like a mini tin, is useful for orange juice. A yogurt pot for rice, that's once cooked. 3 tablespoons for beans and pulses, and a 1 piece for spaghetti. So for a portion for one. But there's, I say, the wrap website, Love Food Hate Waste, is some really good advice on portions. So if you find you're throwing food away because you're cooking too much, then try using some of these online resources, and we'll have a recording of this webinar. So this slide you'll be able to refer to if you need to. So can I have the next slide, please? And so finally, in this section is serving the right amount. The picture just shows how two exactly the same bits of bread and satsumas look very different on different size plates. Those plates were a side plate and a dinner plate, but you can see that actually the food looks a lot more on the smaller plate. So we would advise, because people's appetites vary and children's appetites will be less than adults. If you've got people with small appetites, you know, their food will look just as much on a smaller plate, and serve things for people appropriately, or even better, let them help themselves. They can always come back for seconds. So just have a think about how much you're serving, and ask people. You know, it's really embarrassing. Certainly I'm somebody who doesn't eat lots, and you know, when people serve me great portions, and I just feel really embarrassed leaving it, but I'd much rather help myself and go back for more. So just think about that. And I can think at Christmas going to some friends, and they sort of piled my plate high, and one of the people said, "Oh, that will be way too much for Barbara." And I said, "Yes, it is way too much for me." And that food went to waste because it had gone on my plate, and I said, "I'll happily give it to somebody." But they went, "No, no, no." There's sort of a worry that you don't give people too much, I think, enough, sorry, particularly at festivals and events. So there's a worry about being seen to be too stingy, but it's better that than letting people serve themselves, have what they want, and then you avoid throwing stuff away. So can I have the next slide, please? And I think we've covered most of the questions, but if there's anybody's got any more in this section, we've covered date labels, fridge layout, using your freezer, how to freeze, and portions and serving the right amounts. But is there any other questions anybody's got, and any of those things, or have I missed any of the questions in the chat? Apologies if I have. Oh, is there a length of time to leave food in a freezer? Now I know the answer to that.
I think for quality it varies, but for safety, if it's kept frozen, it will keep pretty much indefinitely. I say things with a high water content are probably more likely to go off or deteriorate in quality quicker, just because of the effect of ice. Probably for some things might keep about a month, other things might be about three months as recommended guidelines, but it just won't be quite as good afterwards, rather than unsafe.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. And can I have the next slide, please? And just whiz through the last few without being too rushed, I hope. We've covered this, I think, already, about using, this section is about using things up and how to use stuff up. And cooling and reheating is something I know people are really nervous about. The guidance is usually cool stuff down quickly, refrigerate or freeze within 2 hours, within 1 if it's rice. Store things for 2 days in the fridge, 1 if it's rice, or freeze, as we've said before. And defrost in the fridge or the microwave. As we said before, make sure you freeze stuff in useful quantities, and defrost. Use it straight away once you've defrosted it, and make sure it's properly defrosted and reheated properly. Can I have the next slide, please? And then the other way of using it up is using up leftovers. There's some great recipes on the BBC website, on other websites too. Love Food, Hate Waste has a recipe section, which I've referred to before. That is also very, very good. And you can put in information about what you've got, and it will tell you what you can make with it as well as how to freeze it. So the aim of that is to encourage us all to be not throwing things away, but actually to be using it up and using up leftover recipes. And websites and social media are great too. You can swap ingredients, you know, once you've got more confidence in the kitchen, I think you get confident about swapping ingredients and swapping leftovers for other things. And soups, stews, frittatas, curries and stir fries are all great things for just using up any old leftovers and not worrying too much about what goes in there. So can I have the next slide, please? The next one is think about whether you can use unusual bits of items for of products too. So here is a use all up banana skin and coconut curry, which I know Chris has tried. So we'd normally class banana skins as an inedible bit of food waste. So food waste is split between edible and inedible. But here is a great example of using up an inverted commas inedible part of the food. The other things appeal. If you look on the Love Food Hate Waste website, there's a great recipe for soup made of potato peelings. There's lots of recipes out there for using up stalks. You can make stocks. You can fry things up till they're crisp. I used to work with a Greek colleague who used to use crystallized orange skins. So you used up every part of the orange, and she made them into like a candied peel, which was great. So just if you've got things left over, there might be something you can do with it rather than throw it away. Can I have the next slide, please? And finally, if you really can't put stuff in the freezer or can't use it up, there are a number of apps now where you can give food away or collect stuff that would have otherwise gone to waste. Too Good To Go is a business food waste app. It sells items that would otherwise go to waste. You can buy them, you can sign up to the app, and it will tell you where there's local shops or cafes that have food that's available each day that would otherwise go to waste. Olio is an app where you share items with neighbours. You go and collect things from a neighbour who's got surplus. That's a great app. It tends to be some areas have got more users, donators and users than other areas, but check it out. It's worth having a look at. Next is for kitchen store management, and Kitchi is very similar. So there's increasing number of apps looking at food waste. So if you search food waste, there probably more come up by the time, you know, if we did this webinar in 6 months' time. And can I have the next slide, please? So that's just if anybody's got any other questions on using up leftovers, cooling and reheating, or food waste apps, or if anybody's come across any other apps that they'd like to share with us, that'd be great.
Can I just check?
Chris has
sorry, does Giles want to be unmuted so he can ask his question? I'll just leave him to respond whilst you continue on, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you. Chris has helpfully said that packaged products usually have guidance on how long you can swim in the fridge or freezer, there's usually a blue icon. Yeah, you're right about that. It usually says store for up to 6 months or 3 months or something like that on them. Is there a question that I've missed in the chat? I can see the answer. Charles saying concern is in 1 minute before midnight on the last day. Yeah, that's technically what they advise. And somebody else has got their hand up, I think, which I can't unmute.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, yes, it's me, Charles. It's just that you'd said, you could take something on the very last day and freeze it. And I was just a little concerned about that, Barbara, because if you took something and it was the last day in which it should be used, and you took it and you put it in the freezer and then you left it there for 3 months. I was just really asking that question, whether whether you're comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable with it as long as when you defrost it. So what I'd say is think about if it's going to take 3 hours or 4 hours to defrost, then probably you want to be thinking 3 to 4 hours before you stick it before the use by day, end of use by day before midnight. So say 8 o'clock, you'd want to stick it in the freezer before 8 o'clock on that day, because all the freezer is doing is pausing that use by time. So if your defrosting time is going to take you over that date, then yeah, you're right. Sorry, I should have probably said just be a bit cautious about that. I mean, we're perhaps being a bit flippant when we say you can freeze it up until midnight. I mean, technically you can, but I would allow for the defrosting time within that.
I think with the FSA guidance is it's up to midnight on the use by date.
Yeah.
So it should be fine right up to that time. I think the point about defrosting is to defrost regardless of what the date is in a safe environment. So either in a fridge, so that when it's defrosting, the food doesn't get warm and microbes don't get active, or use a defrost setting on the microwave, but then once it's defrosted, to use it up immediately. So I think it's just safe defrosting, right? I think it's the point. The other point.
Yeah, that's a good
point.
Rather
than leaving stuff, say, out on a work surface. But
Great, thanks for that. And we've just got time for a quick question. We've only about 5 minutes left. Andrew said, is it true you can use a paper towel with some foods, such as salad leaves, in a plastic bag to absorb moisture and make it last longer? As I say, we've only got a minute really on that before we finish off.
Seen that recommended for things like salads, mushrooms, and so on.
Great, thanks, Chris. Okay, and we've just got a summary slide, I think, have we? Is there anything you want to add to that in terms of the summary slide? Next slide, please, Robin.
So it's really just a resume of what we've been looking at, and hopefully that's been of some help, looking at the shopping, what to do in the kitchen, and how to use things up. Love Food Hate Waste website and BBC Food are also good sources. If you found this helpful, then please do share with any work colleagues, friends, family who might be interested. I think summarizes next step, and also I think on the Love Food Hate Waste website, if anyone's interested, there's a food waste diary which might be quite a good place for people to start, just to see what whether it is an issue for them, and where and why, and that can inform what actions to take.
That's fantastic. Thank you ever so much. And a big thank you to both Chris and Barbara for your input this evening.